Nice to see you all. My name is Beth Shank. I work here at St. Pat's in the Women's Care Center. I'm a nurse. And we're really excited to start our conference tonight, the Turning the Tide Conference. And we're glad that you heard about it and got here. And especially we're glad that you're here tonight to kick it off with us, especially as we ground the conference in spiritual perspective. So what you have seen so far is some art that was offered based on our theme this year about what is our obligation to the future by high school students. And I want to thank Claudia Brown for arranging that. Thank you so much. So that's what's been showing here, and that's what's along that wall over there. So it's really interesting to get the perspective that these students bring. What we're going to do next, briefly, is have an inaugural showing of an interesting video. It's very interesting to me, and I hope that you all enjoy it. We took this opportunity of this conference to interview several people in Missoula on this theme. What is our obligation to the future? How do you think about the future? What does it mean to you and about our world? So we're going to show that for the very first time right now. I haven't even seen the finished version. And then we will start our panel. So thank you so much.
Oh, I very much care about the future. I think I could look back and say my whole life has been concerned for the present and how we're moving to the future, because they're not disconnected.
I think caring about the future, there's something innate about it. I think there's something biological. But I think, there's just this inherent sense that we have a responsibility to the future.
Is the future 2 minutes from now, 2 days from now, or 20 years from now? And I care about all of those. So the quality of life that I have now, I do want 20 years from now, and even a better life, I think.
I believe that our faith should serve as an inspiration to all of us to contribute and be active in the process of ensuring the future.
I think about the future because it helps me determine what my decisions and my actions are today in the present.
Seeing that my choices have an impact on the planet and the organisms that live here, seeing that has helped me to be able to, I think in some sense, make better choices because I do feel the sense of commitment toward the future.
I am a steward. I think all of us who work in city government, who are called to service in one way or another, are stewards. So our responsibility here is not only to the present, but absolutely to the future.
And so as someone who is in medicine, I'm very motivated because I look at the science. I look at what the prospects are for a future for our planet, for other species, for humans, realizing that we're losing, I think it's 200 species a day that are becoming extinct, just wiped off the face of the earth.
This idea about the future, for me, is connected almost at a spiritual level of this connection to life and this planet, that we're all connected. We're all connected. And what we do affects everything else. And I think that's the sort of sense of responsibility that I have, that I need to do what I can while I'm here to make a difference.
I can't quite imagine the future, despite all of the folks who have described it, ranging from former vice presidents to Nobel laureates. to folks in Alaskan villages that are disappearing into the water. It's really difficult to comprehend that. So some of it's about finding the little piece that you can sort of connect to.
It's being really fully grounded in the present as the future unfolds.
Institutionally, it's obviously, as I mentioned before, I mean, hospitals are huge polluters. The amount of disposables that we run through, the amount of chemicals that we use, the amount of energy that we use. So I think that being one of the largest employers in the community, we have a special role and a special really demand is placed upon us to find better ways to engage in the business of healthcare, but do it in such a fashion that's more sustainable.
Institutions need to clean up their act, in a sense, the walking the walk, practicing what you preach before they can convince others to do that.
When I became a nurse, it became a little bit of a problem for me ethically, because I felt like I'm working so hard to keep people well and to help people recover well, and yet I'm also causing problems that are contributing to worse health. My first recycling project here at St. Pat's was in 1993, just recognizing that we contribute significantly to this issue, and at the same time we're here to protect and maintain health.
Our big, hairy, audacious goal really is changing the way healthcare is delivered. And interestingly enough, it's a paradoxical or schizophrenic concept, because what we're trying to do in our primary care settings is keep people out of the hospital. And historically, the way that we make money is the more people we have in the hospital. And that really is kind of a lopsided equation. And working towards a delivery system that actually does do a better job of keeping people healthy, keeping people in the lowest cost settings, engaging with our community in a different capacity, has tremendous implications that are, quite frankly, very exciting.
And so I'm very hopeful that some form, for example, of universal health care would occur, where every person in this country would be cared for, taken care of, and shown how to be healthy. So we need that kind of change in the government, starting today, but moving in the future.
We haven't been very mindful, we haven't been very compassionate, we haven't been very respectful, and this is such a grand opportunity to really change our minds at this point.
I think the biggest issues for me are climate change and just human population and consumption. We're in such an incredible state of denial about the impact that we as a single species have had on this planet. I mean, we're at 7 billion people right now. And just if you look at the curve of population growth, much of that has happened in this last century. And unfortunately, that curve is also huge when we look at consumption and our impact on the earth. And yet we're in such a state of denial about it.
We seem to be a short-sighted species, worrisomely so, because I think we can all think of examples in our own lives where we have made decisions that, had we taken a moment, we could have foreseen some possible dire consequences, even within the next week or the next month, and yet we proceeded to act in a way that would ultimately be counterproductive for our own, well-being or someone else's.
This idea that all people looking at how we can sustain or regenerate, because we have to go beyond sustainability at this point.
I feel like when people are given kind of permission and invited to solve their own problems, it's phenomenal what they come up with. Things that we could never think of, these glorious solutions. And it reminds me of the way nature works, because if you look at how nature solves its own problems, it's just phenomenal. And what we learn through that, and what we are learning through that, through biomimicry and other approaches.
We have solutions to all the challenges that we face right now. It's not like we're sitting here with no solutions. There are plenty of solutions. And if collectively we all decided to change our own personal behavior, that would make a huge difference. And then on the larger scale, on the societal scale, especially around things with climate change, there's plenty of evidence that we have the technologies, we have alternative sources of energy, and through that and using conservation, there's no question we could change how we live on this planet. But we've all got to help, and we've all got to pull our weight.
After all, in our belief, when we pass on to the next life, what we leave behind us is our legacy, nothing material.
It's a transformative work that we have to do as those sentient beings that are capable of dreaming a different way. The future is getting past survival. I think so many people talk about there's a survivalist mentality out there. Some people, when we think about the changes in the world, well, how will I make it through? But that is such a base level. And what we really want to do is we want to thrive and be fulfilled, and so that's going to take something more.
And then the second piece of that is we're created in community. So we're created as social beings, that there is no such thing as a person or an individual, but we are a people. And out of that then is that whole sense of the common good. That if in fact my focus is on what is good for the whole, then my individual needs will be met in a way that I would never imagine.
Well, I think we have choices every day that we can make on an individual level, one person at a time sort of choices, which then push our market and it pushes our behavior on the whole as well. So examples of that have to do, I basically organize these things by energy, waste, toxins, and engagement. And so if I were to think of something in each category, energy, the big two ways that we can impact energy in our own lives really are through our transportation, which is about half of our energy use, and through our homes.
At the City of Missoula, we've gone through a fairly comprehensive energy audit, and as a function of that, we're figuring out new ways to save energy, which saves us money, which is great for the folks we serve, great for the environment. So that's a piece that we can engage in, and if we can demonstrate to folks that makes sense in a big place like the City of Missoula, then it might work in their homes.
The outdoors is a great place to be. It allows you to be in nature. I like quiet spots sometimes where I can just sit by myself in a park.
A ton of ways to help reduce carbon footprint for any type of building. Like just growing a few more plants inside the building can help the air. Solar power is a great little way to do it. You can just put them on top of a building, get some energy from the sun.
This generation knows that the sky's the limit, and that, even if some things look really challenging, frightening, just untethered problems, bring it on. There's things that they can do to create the fix. So I think this generation is all about innovation. They still have those connections and that capacity to care about the bigger picture. They're smart, and I think we've got a good crop of leaders coming.
A lot of this has to do with building trust with people, and that takes time and energy and commitment. But when you have it, you can get a lot more done.
I have an undying optimism, basically. I feel like we, because we're smart people and energetic and caring and incredibly innovative, we can solve these problems.
Missoula is a fabulous place to be supported in our efforts to create a future.
We really have a lot of really great things going for us here in Western Montana and on the economic development front. And if we don't decide what we want to look like 15 years down the road, it's just going to happen to us.
So I think it's really important for us to act on every single level, from the personal to the community to the political to the global.
We call Montana the last best place. And then I thought, wow, why is that? Why is Montana the last best place, or Missoula, or this area? And why can't every place be the best place?
I think the biggest thing you can do in the world, this is going to sound so simple. You learned it in kindergarten, theoretically. It's share.
With love, we can attain the highest of human existence.
What does love feel like? Why do I care? And out of that sense of love and care, service flows.
We all have great capacity to make a huge difference, and especially now. And if not now, when?
Thank you very much. Glad that you enjoyed that and that we showed it for the first time. It was really interesting and fabulous to make. It's just amazing. So we are now ready to welcome first our, just a second, our facilitator, Marianne Sladish-Lentz. Many of you know her, and she is a beloved figure here at St. Pat's and in Missoula. And if any of you have been involved with celebrating women over the years, you know Marianne through that way and may know her in other ways. So she will serve as facilitator of this panel, and I think we will invite Marianne to come up and invite the panelists also to come up and have a seat here along these microphones.
Thanks, Beth.
Yes.
So as the panelists are coming forward, you may recognize some of their faces from the movie that we just had the opportunity to see. So if you're looking for autographs, please ask them as we share this time together tonight. What I noticed as that video was moving on is some very intense thoughtfulness around this whole conversation about what's our obligation for the future, and really a sense of intention, I guess, around answers to that question. Until the very last piece, where the question came up on the screen, what's your vision for the future? And all of a sudden, everybody lightened up. And there was light in everyone's eyes and a little lightness in everyone's voice and a sense of hope and a real sense of together we can do this. And so as we gather tonight, that's what I think the spiritual piece offers to this conversation about what's our obligation for the future. It's with a sense of hope and really with a sense of vision for how things could be that we engage in this conversation tonight. So on the one level, Beth introduced me as the facilitator tonight, but what I would prefer is to think about this gathering not as all of us lined up in tables as we are, but to somehow try to imagine that we're in someone's living room and that we've just gathered here following our evening meal for coffee and dessert, and that we just have the opportunity to, in a very casual, relaxed, thoughtful way, to spend some time together talking about what's important to us. And so we just have the opportunity to get that conversation going by some people in our community who have been asked to give us some thoughts from their particular spiritual tradition about what's our vision for how we might bring about a harmonious world order that connects us with the beauty of creation that's all around us. And so you have a paper like this, and if you didn't get one, please pick one up as you leave. And each person that's represented here is a little paragraph. There's a little paragraph about them. And so, so they represent the spiritual traditions of Christianity, of Buddhism, Muslim, Jewish, Native American, and a broad spectrum of the spiritual traditions. So we've invited each person to just share a little bit, and we'll just allow each person to have an opportunity to do that. And then we'll engage in a conversation together. And I'll do my best to keep the conversation flowing and to keep us connected with each other so it doesn't feel like we're in a classroom, but that we really are sharing together from what's most important to us, which is the deepest spirit within us that unites us together. So we have lined up here Mike Cox and Reverend Peter Schober, Father Jim Hogan, Kate Shanley, Samir Bitar, Bert Chesson, and Dr. Georgia Milan. And maybe what I'll do is I'll start with Mike, and I'll go down to Georgia, and we'll mix it up a little bit so that we can just have a conversation together. So Mike, would you begin, please? You got the wonderful benefit of sitting right here on the first seat.
I was hoping you'd start the other side. Well, gosh, it is a real privilege and an honor to be sitting here with this great group. I feel humbled and inadequate. One of the, I'm Roman Catholic, and when I first got the question for this, my mind immediately went to, what does the Catholic Church think? Then I remembered something that I'd studied in theology, which talked about what's called the sensus fidelium, which in the tradition that I'm from speaks to the sense of the faithful, which is even more powerful than any written document we could have. And that is rooted in our conscience and rooted in this sense of what is right. So I kind of rewrote my notes and took some thoughts from a pastoral letter that the bishops wrote on the Columbia River watershed. And for me, at the time, I'm a graduate of Carroll, and one of my professors there, John Hart, was one of the writers of it. So for me personally, when you think about spirit, connected into that document, connected into the fact that I grew up in Spokane and lived in the watershed for a number of years. One of the things that the watershed speaks of, or that document spoke of, was the sense of living water. And that living water starts at the very beginning of the tradition with the sense that Jesus is the living water for all of us. And that living water is both a gift that we have inside of us, but also calls us to be mindful of the water around us. And living in the city of rivers, having lived in Missoula for only a year and a half, feels like 10 some days. But it's a gift to be here because that water is something we need to steward. And when Marianne on the video spoke to the sense of common good, for me, common good, being the father of 4 young kids, is about what is most right for all of us in this community right now and in our world. But also what is right for our children and what is good for our children. And then something we often don't think about in that sense of common good, but what is right for people 1,000 years from now. We often are very conscious of our children, our grandchildren, great-grandchildren perhaps, but we miss the people that are going to be here when we're long gone. And that document about the Columbia River watershed speaks to that as well, because it looks at the tradition, and within the Catholic tradition, it is tradition that teaches us that it's long, like millennia long, and as it's evolved, going back to that living water, it has melded, it has grown. And my hope is that as we continue to grow and we continue to evolve as a faith tradition that has impact on its own members, but also on the entire world in many ways, that we evolve in a way that we never forget that sense of water flowing in us and then through us into our world. And then we receive so much from the world, so that when we steward our resources for the rest of eternity. And we are mindful of that. It's not about what's going to happen next year or 5 years from now. It's what's going to happen 500 years. And finally, I'm probably getting short on time, the sense of faith-seeking understanding. One of the tenets of the Catholic tradition, and from my perspective, is a sense of collaboration and dialogue, that no one is ever right, but we are all right together. And there's some dignity in that. We instill the value of dignity for all living things. And when we think about dignity, we often think about just human beings. But there is a dignity to the earth that this tradition speaks to as well. And we can't forget that part. That as we live, we can be gentle and kind with one another, but we absolutely have to be gentle and kind with the ground we walk on, the rivers we swim in, and the space in which we live.
So Mike, as you were talking, it occurred to me that one of the things that I might invite all of us to do really is to think about our own sense of spirituality. And many of us come from a particular tradition. Perhaps we were raised in a religious expression of our spirituality. Perhaps we're still there, or we've shifted or changed. But from your own perspective, how would you describe your own sense of spirituality as we listen to our presenters tonight? And then from, Mike, what you also said, which I think is really important for us to think about, is we can talk about this from a variety of perspectives. From an intellectual point of view, what do the spiritual traditions teach about things? And again, our conversation tonight is from a perspective of perhaps what we've come to know. How has that seeped into our being and become part of our lived experience? So teachings and concepts and foundations, how do they find their way into our lived reality? So I will make the bold statement. It really probably isn't all that bold, but all of us are spiritual. We may not all be religious. And so from that sense of deep spirituality, what is it that we are called to do, and how are we called to be in relationship with each other and with this earth? So going back to your own sense of spirituality, and then as you listen to what is presented, what touches you particularly? So what resonates? And as we have a conversation together, following what we hear here, what is it that you would like to know more about? Or what is it might you like to have deeper dialogue from your own perspective with? Okay? So, Georgia, please.
Oh, okay. Well, wait a minute. Yes, hello. And I'm a student of Buddhism, and there are other students of Buddhism out there who probably know much more than me, so please feel free to chime in. And I do want to recognize Khenpo Tenzin, who is visiting. He is from Tibet and actually a very high learned scholar in Tibetan Buddhism. And if he wasn't so shy about his English, I would march him up here, but out of such great respect for him. So please speak up and answer any questions, but I'm very honored that he is here. And when Beth and I were thinking about this conference, we were thinking about looking at the spirituality behind the conference, because of course that's the heart of everything. And so the subtext to our conference is, what is our obligation to the future? And so I was thinking about that from a Buddhist perspective. What is our obligation to the future? And I'm just going to hold this over here. But as we know, the future looks pretty grim from a scientific perspective. We've crossed the threshold of sustainability as far as climate change, as far as our CO2 emissions, the greenhouse gases, as far as loss of biodiversity, the nitrogen cycle, and we're very close now in acidification of the ocean. So scientifically, we're kind of past the point of there probably being a future. And that's very sobering because we don't live like that. You know, and I think it's very difficult sometimes to have people sign advance directives because people don't want to think about their own deaths. And I think, well, how can they think about the death of the planet if we can't even, you know, think about our own deaths? But it is a time that the answer lies in our spirituality. And so to sit up here with true spiritual leaders, when I am not a spiritual leader, I'm just totally a student, is a great honor for me because it is in the spiritual, and I say spiritual institutions, but it's in the spiritual beliefs that we're going to take our stand. And I'm hoping that the doctors and healthcare providers will take a stand too, because if we don't, there's not going to be a future. But thinking about Buddhism and our obligation to the future, it's very interesting because as Buddhists, we think of all sentient beings. You know, so all, you know, all the living bugs and insects and snakes and frogs and everything, they're all sentient beings. And we think of them as all our mothers and our children. And we think of them as our relations. That all sentient beings everywhere want happiness. And so we're very respectful to all sentient beings. So like in the film, when we mentioned that every year now we're losing 20,000 to 30,000 species are becoming extinct, wiped off the face of the earth, the DNA, and that's only the known species. And it's because of our human behavior. And it's us, you know, 20% in the developed countries that are calling the shots. So it's very, very sobering. So as a Buddhist, we think about all of these sentient beings who are all of our relatives. We think that because we believe in reincarnation. And so we believe that in some past life, that everything was our mother and our children, and in some future life, you know, that we will also take very, very different forms of life. And so we don't really make such a distinction between past, present, and future, and ourselves versus our children, because we are all so very, very interdependent. And as Buddhists, you know, we look physically at interdependence from an ordinary mind perspective, knowing that even as the Buddha's teachings are that, and we know as scientists, that the sun is our sole source of energy. But we can't do anything with sun, right? So we need plants to photosynthesize. We need all the microorganisms that make the topsoil. We need the rain. We need the wind. We need all of these causes and conditions to bring us any sustenance, to bring us any life. So even from an ordinary mind perspective, as Buddhists, we know that the interdependence is way beyond our understanding. And then even greater than that, we have an interdependence that lies in our unity of consciousness. But one thing that we respect, that as human beings, we are the most fortunate sentient beings, and that we have waited thousands, maybe millions of lifetimes, because it is only by being a human being that we have language, that we have memory, that we are able to foresee into the future, that we are able to take great responsibility for our actions, that we create the whole future for all of these species. And so this is a great, great honor, and it's a great responsibility. So we have a huge belief in universal responsibility and a global ethic, because we are the caretakers. And so when we look at this responsibility, we always go back to, in Buddhism, the Four Noble Truths, which is that there's suffering. So we know there's destruction of the environment, and we know that there's a cause for this suffering, which is our human activity, our greed, our consumption. And the third noble truth is that there is cessation to this suffering. And the fourth is there is a way, there's a path. So as Buddhists, we try not to get into such denial. We try and meditate and be mindful about there's suffering and there's no escape from it. There's suffering and there's a cause for it. And there's an antidote that can be applied. So we become familiar with it. We become so intimate with it that we don't run away, so that then we can apply, we can walk the path of what is going to take away the suffering from ourselves and from all sentient beings. And that's what we're doing here tonight. You know, we're embracing the path. We're not in denial. And as Buddhists, we think about karma very, very seriously. So we know that there's 3 poisons, and the first one is desire. And the Western culture, we're consuming the world, aren't we? I mean, our desire and our greed. This is the main poison of the Western countries. And it's very interesting because the Buddha taught a whole sutra about this, and it was called Eating the Flesh of Your Child. And my husband said, no, don't tell them that sutra. And I'm sure I won't go into the details. But it was parents eating the flesh of their child in such great ignorance and with such great suffering. They just couldn't be even mindful of what they were doing. And the Buddha said there would be a time when we will eat the flesh of our children unless we're mindful. And that is in fact what we're doing right now. We are eating the flesh of our children. We can no longer act like we know that there's a future because we don't know that. And so as Buddhists, we take this very, very seriously. And the good news is that as Buddhists, as in most spiritual traditions, we believe that we are innately good. You know, that we are innately compassionate beings, that we may have these obscurations of desire and anger and ignorance, but all we have to do is sit with ourselves, with our basic nature. And from that, such great compassion arises that we spontaneously have the right thought, speech, and action. And so that's all we have to do. It's so simple, but it takes great courage and great determination. And so that is the Buddhist perspective. Thank you, Marianne.
So Georgia, one of the things you pointed out in your own deep humility is that we're all students, really. That no matter how much we know or how we've been called to lead, that basically we're all together learning moment by moment. And the great teaching that you just gave us was a reminder to be mindful. And several people on the video mentioned this being grounded in the present, so attentive and so intentional about where we are in the present, so mindful that we will be moved to the next place with compassion, with honesty, with truth, and with an ability to bring forth the vision. So thank you very much for that beautiful, beautiful teaching. So, Peter?
Thank you. In thinking about the theme tonight about what is our obligation to the future, it struck me that faith traditions of all types are pretty hardwired to pass on the timeless truths to the next generation. It's just a part of what we do. And now we need to not only extend the stories, but we need to extend a sense of the sacredness of Earth itself. And I don't know that we've ever had that conception before, because no generation has ever accumulated so much damage in the process. And so it gives the traditions of faith a deeper need to extend and carry on. And I think we need to learn how to do that. And I think we need to learn to have a new language with it too. I know, and it's probably true for most of us up here tonight, we can't really talk very deeply about environmental science. I know I can't. But I can talk a little bit in theological and spiritual terms. And clearly, at least to me, that language has to be brought to the table. when it comes to the state of the world. And I think lots of folks would ask why. You know, it's looked at as, you know, more biological or ecological instead of spiritual. Why would you bring spirituality, the way of the inner journey of the soul? What would that have to do with the outer life of the material environment? So folks ask that, and increasingly, and I think it's important to say, more and more people are asking, how can we not? There's been a real change, I hope. My tradition, I'm a pastor in the United Church of Christ. United Church of Christ is one of the mainline Protestant denominations. We're sort of known as on the left side of things with that. We have a real tradition of social justice involvement. But I also very much think of myself as an ecumenical Christian, deeply formed and informed by other traditions. And I think that that's moving as people, you know, on one hand kind of rigidify with our religious traditions. There's also another movement going on where people really are growing beyond their sort of tribal ghettos. We're understanding each other more, and there's some remarkable things going on ecumenically, I think, within the Christian community and in terms of interfaith activities as well. I'd like to share a quote that comes from my tradition. It's a statement that is in the United Church of Christ. It says, "We understand scriptures compel us to act on our faith, grounded in wonder, reverence, love, and respect for all of God's creation. But clearly God's creation is groaning under the burden of injustice, greed, and arrogance. Our choices have resulted in vanishing and degraded farmland, air unfit to breathe, and water unfit to drink, unsustainable energy processes and consumption, and the perilous, immediate, and long-term worldwide consequences of global warming and climate change. Poor communities and communities of color will disproportionately suffer the unjust consequences of our choices, and now we realize more every day that our choices threaten the voiceless natural systems that sustain all of life itself." And so, you know, I thought that statement portrays our situation in sort of a macro way, and I wonder, how did we get to this place? I can't help but think that we are the recipients of centuries and centuries and centuries, at least in the Western world, of living in a pretty dualistic, rationalistic culture that divides things up instead of unites them. And many people today are saying we're journeying towards a more unitive vision. We're not going to continue, we can't continue to separate out so many things. All of these false distinctions we live with. We separate the inner life from the outer life. We are willing to divorce economic progress from spiritual depth. We separate environmental well-being from cultural well-being. We've arrived at a place and a time when we realize that these massive separations that we do in so many ways have created splits between earth and spirit, between body and soul, also between rich and poor, between individual piety and corporate morality, between the creator of life and creation. And all of those separations are false. And we need to come to our senses, and we need to come to our souls. And as religious voices, we have to say that. And it's new language. I think the gist of what I would say for this theme of what our obligation would be for the future is that we need, in all of our religious traditions, to reclaim what we already have. We already have the story. And I would think, particularly in a Christian context, two of the things that we have really forgotten are the teachings on nonviolence and the teachings on simplicity. Many people today say that the issue of the 21st century will be the issue of nonviolence. And obviously that's not only between people, but that's in our relationship to the earth as well. A third very important point for me has to do with language. How do we, as people of conscience, as people of faith, as people who strive for and pray for a healthier and more sustainable world, how can we proclaim that in a way that it can be heard? And I'm very worried that we don't do a very good job of that. It seems to me, when you read the statistics, fewer and fewer people believe that climate change is real. Fewer and fewer people seem to be willing to really live out a more sustainable lifestyle. And it would seem to me at the same time that the environmental community, perhaps we have not found a real compelling way to present that. An important notion, I think, to consider deeply, and a phrase I've grown to like a lot, is that facts inform us, but values transform us. And I think in the environmental community, we love to talk about facts until the cows come home. And people who oppose changes in our culture are much, much better than we are about talking about values. And we need to learn how to do that in a compelling sort of way. The progressive environmental community throws out facts, and oftentimes the reactionary other side throws out values. And I think it's very true that values beat out facts every day of the week, including Sundays. You know, we tend to think, well, if people know the facts, they'll change. I don't think that's the nature of change. I think we have to change hearts. I think we have to deal with our souls. Whatever our role might be in life, we have to be able to live out of our soul in order to be more deeply grounded, not only in love, but also in justice. Some say that the movement that we all have to make from the head to the heart is the longest journey in the world, and I agree with that. Some say it's the longest journey in the world that we have to make in order to grow up. And I think they're right. I think we need to learn that. And I hope to find ways of making it true. And I also know that we very much need each other in order to make that happen. Thank you.
So you've packed a lot in those 5 or so minutes. And what I would just invite us to, before we just move on to another perspective, is to just pause for a moment. And what did you hear from what Peter just said that you don't want to forget? What did you hear?
We're all in this together no matter where we live, no matter what our income, no matter our strategies. We have to overcome our tribalism necessarily in order to help the planet. We have nothing else. We live like a rock in the backyard, you know.
So we're all in this together. And we must not see the divisions, but we must see the union. And Peter, I think what you've called us to in a very profound way is we must be a prophetic voice. And that takes a lot of courage. And at the same time, a reminder that we already know. How do we speak it in a way that it will be received and heard together? So, thank you very much. Bert?
Thank you. I think what Peter said, he touched on a number of themes here, and I think your introduction actually leads very nicely into what I want to say. I'm going to respond in one way. I'm of the Jewish faith. I don't necessarily speak for Judaism. I am an individual who's grown up in a very rich tradition with many varied voices. But there are some common themes, there are some very important messages, and the way I'm going to do it is, I think, speak a little bit of the way that Peter has opened the door, and that is, I'm going to tell a couple very short stories, and I think telling stories may be one way to really project our values that address important ideas related to this. We can talk and the facts, but I think the traditions of humankind really do relate to stories. Stories have very profound harmonics, and so that's what I want to say. I'll start off, there's a story about a learned man. His name is Choni, and Choni was well known in his community for being able to make decisions and dividing right from wrong and all. He's walking along the road one day, and he sees a man planting a carob tree, and he engages him in a conversation. He asks the man, he notices that it's a fruit-bearing tree that he's planting, and he said, "When will this tree bear fruit?" And the man says, "In 70 years. Choni's taken back a little bit, and he looks at him, and he kind of figures, he said, and asked him, "Are you going to be still alive or in any health to enjoy the fruit of this tree?" And he said, "No, I don't know, but I have enjoyed the fruit of my grandfather and the trees that have been planted by my father, and so I'm planting this tree for my children and for my grandchildren." And so I think that's the kind of message, that's one of the stories that we get from the Jewish tradition, and I think it actually speaks to what we are talking about in terms of really thinking about the future, that we need to be planting the trees, we need to be telling the stories that will inform and guide us in the kinds of decisions related to the environment and to the health. Another little interesting phrase from the writings within the Jewish tradition has to do with if a man is planting a sapling, just a very small tree, and someone comes along and tells him the Messiah has come, he is first obligated to plant the sapling before he goes to greet the Messiah. So I think those two little stories talk about a perspective that we have obligations to continue planting, teaching among our communities, and I think the common themes that Peter and Michael and Georgia have presented are all also found in our tradition. I think we are not by any means unique. I think there are a couple of themes that I would like to touch upon. A central theme in Judaism is called Tikkun Olam, repairing the world. We're all here with an obligation to repair the world. But another Jewish saying is, even though we can't necessarily complete the work that we are obligated to do in repairing the world, we can neither desist from doing that work. So we all have an obligation to repair the world. And one of the other little pieces that I think is related to this is the removal of barriers. I think in our tradition, and sure in all the traditions, one of the things is that you don't put obstacles in front of the blind, you don't put obstacles in front of the disabled. I think extrapolating from that, we need to be removing all those obstacles that we have built and put in, and that people tend to build to making progress towards repairing the world. Now, so I think that's an important theme related to the future and how we deal with the issues, the challenges. Just a couple of other things. The name Israel, meaning the people, the Jewish people, means actually to struggle with God. And so this is something that God is a is a challenge to us. We're always challenged by God, and it's that struggle is not so dissimilar from the struggle we have. Yes, it's bigger and more profound maybe today. People have always had struggles, but at the root of what the Jewish people have been struggling with, and as all peoples have struggled with, is that struggle with God. So I appreciate that. Just one more little thing I'll say. We are entering into the Easter Passover season. Now, Passover is, as you all know, I assume, is the story of the Exodus, of the story of freedom from slavery, from all those narrow places. The name Egypt in Hebrew is called Mitzrayim, and Mitzrayim means the narrow place. We all tend to put ourselves in narrow places, and we need to be able to find ways to open up and to be open to all the other things that are in life, to appreciate, to value. I think an important theme here in public health and in environmental stewardship is placing those values. I appreciate what Peter said. We really, if we're going to carry out the work, we have to value every individual person. We don't favor one or another, and we also value the earth. But getting back to Passover and to the story of freedom, freedom releases you and hopefully opens up that narrow place, but that's not the whole story. The next holiday that follows Passover in the Jewish holiday cycle is called Shavuot. Shavuos. Shavuot is the holiday where we get the Ten Commandments. So following freedom, we come to responsibility. And so we are blessed by having freedoms here and the ability to gather, to talk about it, but we have a responsibility, and that's, so the cycle of holidays, I think, within at least the Jewish tradition, I'm sure within other traditions, makes that connection between freedom and responsibility. So I think those are the main themes that I think, coming from the Jewish tradition, speak to the theme tonight.
So Bert, thank you very much for reminding us of the power of story. Because what stories do is bring us right back to what's most important and what's most meaningful. And your breaking open those words for us tonight is another reminder that there's always something deeper going on beyond, underneath the surface. So how do we repair the earth? We plant a tree. Thank you. Jim?
Well, first, I am grateful. You folks here at St. Pat's do such wonderful things, and it's always an honor to be a part of you and listen and take part in what you do. So thanks for that. The film is great. Is Beth still here? Maybe the most striking thing in the film was the smiling Buddha over her left shoulder. I guess maybe you noticed that. I don't know. Well, climate change, if science is reliable and trustworthy, is something that I wholeheartedly trust is happening. And it involves enormous life issues. I trust James Hansen, the foremost climatologist, our own Steve Running, and a vast array of other climate scientists. The implications of the change is serious beyond my comprehension, and I'm certainly beyond all of us together. So with that little thought, what is our obligation to the future? Well, I'm a Catholic priest, Catholic Christian, and so some kind of theologian, I think. My bishop may not always agree, but I think I am. Before considering what is our obligation to the future from the Catholic perspective, I'll tell you a little story. Now that I'm in senior status, I'm trying to do a whole variety of things. So a couple of years ago, about in May, I joined a couple of friends and we took the ferry to Alaska. Never been to Alaska. And one day out of Juneau, I think, we took a small boat to go visit glaciers. And it was truly awesome. We went back in these fjords where these magnificent glaciers were calving. And we saw chunks of ice break off of those that are taller than this building by double. And the wave that came to our boat was like we're way up in the air. And I mean, this is a fantastic experience. And also a dreadful experience. You go to Glacier Park hiking, most of the glaciers are now gone and are soon leaving. Glaciers mean fresh water. Fresh water means good agriculture. It means life. And there's a decreasing availability of good, clean, fresh water in our world. We don't know that yet. We still turn on the spigot and let her flow. I was just in East Africa. We were in tented camps. They had to truck the water to where we were. You can use 10 liters tonight for a shower. Should have heard my companions talk about that one. Very interesting. The ocean is declining as the waters change. In a couple of years, maybe this year, in the next couple of years, the Arctic will be open all winter, so ships can travel across the northern part of the globe. When the ice is gone, we have a whole different world. So scientists are telling us all these drastic things, but they're also saying that the worst of the future is avoidable. And I think that's why it's so important for things like you are putting on here this weekend. So as a Roman Catholic priest, my life is I hope all Roman Catholics, is founded in the written gospel and in our oral traditions. And at the core of that tradition is a man named Jesus. He was Jewish, Bert, and he always was a Jew. He was never a Christian. He wasn't. They didn't exist. He was born in Nazareth. A lot of scholars say he was born in Nazareth, pardon me, and spent his life in Galilee. And our source for understanding him are the written Gospels, which give us only a fleeting glimpse of his public life. In his early 30s, he became an itinerant preacher. The core of his teaching was a little phrase, the kingdom of God. It appears nearly 100 times in the four Gospels. It comes from the Hebrew Bible texts of Ezekiel and Daniel. And that simple phrase, the kingdom of God, what does that mean? Well, I have come in my own journey to translate it as the reign of God, or more critically, as God's new reality. And I think that's what Jesus came to call us to, is God's new reality, creation as creation ought to be. And that call reverberates, I think, to us today very significantly. Jesus' own self-reference and self-identification was the phrase that actually comes from Ezekiel, and Daniel. And that's the little phrase, the Son of Man. That phrase means the human being. So whenever Jesus of Nazareth referred to himself, he referred to himself as the human being. As I reflect on his life, his ministry, his teaching, I begin to be more and more convinced that that self-identifying phrase means he is the model and the mentor of what all of us are created to be. The model and mentor of what we are to be. And that's not a very complex thing. It's to be human. Georgia, you spoke of that. I would kind of dispute, I think we have not become human yet. We're in process of becoming human. And this man of Nazareth set before us a model of what it is to be human. And Peter referred to it, nonviolent, unconditional love. And that's the heart of the Christian gospel, nonviolent, unconditional love. Now, referring a little bit to what Peter said too, I think we've gotten lost as Christian people in a cloud of theological efforts to explain the most important aspect of the life of Jesus, and that is that God, we believe God raised him from the dead. We still don't know what that means. So we theologically speculate and discuss, and we come up with a variety of things. It's an affirmation and a confirmation that all he lived and all he taught is valid. That's what I think the resurrection means. God's stamp of approval. Listen to this. This is the model and the mentor of what I'm calling all of you to be. God doesn't speak to us that way, but by implication. So I think to follow Jesus of Nazareth, to be a Christian, is not about what we believe, the facts, but it's about what we become. It's about becoming fully human. Imitating Christ is an old phrase within the Catholic tradition. Now, part of that fog that we've gotten lost in is the idea of salvation. And Bert, I appreciate your comment that for the Jewish tradition, and it should be for all of us, salvation meant freedom from slavery in Egypt. But I'd extend that and say it means freedom from all that makes us less than human. If Jesus tried to communicate anything, it was that God is not up there somewhere. And I think almost everybody I speak to always thinks of God up there somewhere. And Jesus was not speaking about a transcendent deity. He was talking about an immanent reality. God is present in and through us and all of creation, and there's no dualism. There's no dualism. Now, this thing of salvation in the Christian tradition is rooted in the book of Genesis. There was a fall, we're described, Adam and Eve. They were expelled, and the doors were closed. And the Christian tradition says Jesus came down, and he went back up to open the doors. And if you believe in him, you can get in the doors. I think we've lost what he's about. If that's what salvation is, what happens to all our Jewish friends in the rest of the world? Jesus came, yes, to bring salvation, to free us, both in our images of what God is like, that God is everywhere, and to free us to become fully human and fully alive. So I think that defines our obligation to the future from the Catholic perspective. We are called to become human beings, which means to be nonviolent and to love without condition. And to the degree that we are violent to any sentient life or other, we have not become human yet. And to the degree that we are not loving without condition, we haven't become human yet. And it's understandable. That's risky business. We know what happened to Jesus for living that way. It's a risky business. And there are three kinds of love worth noting, and I think the Jewish tradition, or the Greek tradition has this in their language. The first is eros, which is the love of physical attraction, which is a wonderful and beautiful and good thing. The next is a bit higher. It's philia, the love of friendship. I love you because of what I get from you, and you love me because of what you get from me. And that's a very good thing. But the highest form of love is agape. I seek your well-being regardless of the cost to me. Unconditional love. So I think that's our obligation to the future, is to live in a nonviolent way and to grow and develop the ability to love without condition. None of us think of ourselves as having a prophetic voice. Someone said that. We do, in a sense, as individuals, by our manner of consumption. Just think of all of us in the room. Or I'd change that a bit. I like to think of all the Catholics in Western Montana. If I just appealed to them, and every one of us became more responsible about how we drive our cars, how we burn lights in our homes, how high we have the heat, and where we get our food, just the Catholics in Western Montana would make a significant difference. But like most of our Christian brothers and sisters, we're all caught up in thinking, how do I get to heaven? And that's not what I don't think that's what Jesus of Nazareth is about. And then we can go further once you get your lights reduced in your home a little bit. As a body politic, we also have obligations. We can reject our nation's stance today to, in the words of the Secretary General of the United Nations, the global suicide pact that we've signed on to. We've never ratified the Kyoto protocols. Well, we should be after our Congress people to do that. I should be after them. I shouldn't be preaching that. I have to be more after our Congress people to make these efforts to do something about climate change. We have a forthcoming election. And I hope even the politicians who are here tonight, and there's one, so he must be here because he cares about climate change. We should address those candidates for office and say, where are you with climate change? I'm disappointed with our American bishops. I mean, they made this big fuss over artificial birth control. That's not the major issue. But climate change certainly is. So I think from this single Catholic priest, somewhat theologian, perspective of what the Catholic tradition says to our obligation to the future, that's what I'm willing to try and express to you tonight. Thanks.
So another one that has the ability to pack a whole lot into a few little minutes. And once again, I think it would just be worth just a moment of silence among us to allow Jim's words to resonate. And if you're able, to just ask yourself, in what little way might I become more fully human? Samir?
Thank you. السلام عليكم أيها السيدات والسادة. Shalom, حافرين في حافرات. Peace be upon you, ladies and gentlemen. What you heard is the Muslim greeting, which symbolizes the actions of the Islamic faith. I would like to start by thanking our sponsors for putting this together and facilitating, bringing us together here on this lovely evening. Welcome, welcome all, and thank you for coming and showing your support. My name is Samir Ibrahim Bitar. I'm Palestinian by birth and experience. I'm American by naturalization and experience, but most of all, and closest to my heart, I'm Montanan by experience and residence. I was raised in the Muslim tradition on Mount of Olives, east of Jerusalem, to Palestinian parents. I got my basic education at St. George's, a British school run by the Anglican Church. My classmates were Muslims, Armenians, Assyrians, and Christians that were affiliated with various Eastern Christian groups. So I grew up in a multilingual, multi-ethnic, multi-religious, and multicultural society. My wife of 30 years, whom I love greatly, was raised in the Catholic tradition. She is a native Montanan born in Fort Benton. We have 2 children, a boy and a girl. Now they are actually 25 and 26, and we're very proud of them. One is receiving her master's this semester, and her brother is working on his second bachelor. And I consider myself a Montana product, and I'm proud of it. I'm really happy to be here tonight. I'm very humbled and honored to be amongst you. As Americans, our diversity is one of our nation's strengths. And my experience here brings to you all of the above and more. I'm proud to be an American, and I'm very proud of my heritage. As a Muslim, I strongly believe and advocate that we, the living, hold the earth in trust for future generations. As a literate, cultured, and educated member of our society, I know that environmental law often reflects an implicit social commitment to respect the needs of future peoples. Now when it comes to faith, in Islam, the relationship between Allah, that's the name for God in Arabic, and the human, is a one-on-one relationship. It is a direct relationship where the human is the agent, the representative, the vicar of Allah, and is directly responsible to Him. That's Him with a capital H. Man, as the agent of Allah on earth, shall carry out His will, do everything Allah loves, and stay away from everything Allah does not love. That being said, our faith should serve as an inspiration to all of us today and for the future. Thus, in academic terms, our obligation to the future is set in place by Allah's trusteeship of His creation to humanity, man, us, we, the people who inhabit this earth. I also believe there is a moral obligation of all educated society members to be active in contributing to the education process in order to preserve a healthy, pluralistic, multicultural, democratic society for today and the future. Our obligations towards the future must find a firm basis in social ethics. These obligations have to do, in the first place, with our conception of the just society. As Americans, we need to exercise the freedom to build the just and peaceful society. Justice is the great work of human beings on earth. Islam, as a way of life, expects humans to conserve the environment for many reasons. One, the environment is Allah's creation. It is a sign of Allah's wisdom, mercy, power, and Allah's other attributes. In Islam, Allah has 99 names which reflect all His attributes. And thus, this will serve to develop human awareness and understanding of Allah and His creation. This is from the Quran, chapter 13, verses 2 and 4, chapter 21, verse 79. 2, Muslims should seek to protect and preserve Allah's creation because by doing so, they protect Allah's creatures, which according to the ulama or Muslim scholars are considered most deserving of protection. In Arabic, we call them hurma, basically untouchable. Islam, as stated in the Quran, treats all animals, creatures, as members of particular nations, just like us. Quote, "No creature is there crawling on the earth, no bird flying with its wings, but they are nations like unto yourselves. We have neglected nothing in the book. Then to their Lord they shall be mustered." The Quran, chapter 6, verse 38. 3, Islam as a way of life is established on the concept of good, that is khair in Arabic. And protecting humanity and the environment is goodness in itself. The Quran states that, quote, "He whoso does good an atom's weight will see it, and he whoso does ill an atom's weight will see it." Chapter 99, verses 7 and 8. 4, human relations in Islam are based on the concept of justice, adl in Arabic, and kindness, ihsan, and not material or economical gain. So, kindly wage peace to preserve values of the spirit for future generations. As for the ethics of consumption in Islam, they rest on 3. A, what is consumed must be lawful and wholesome. One must give the poor their share in one's wealth. That is called zakat, and it's one of the pillars in Islam. One is not permitted to be wasteful with one's goods. That's in Arabic called israf. 5, in Islam, humans are expected to protect the environment. It's Allah's creation, since no other creature is able to perform this task. Humans are the only beings that Allah has entrusted with the responsibility of looking after the earth. It is a trusteeship placed upon us by our Creator. That being said, allow me to tell you that every single human being has a great obligation to shape the future of a new generation that would enjoy life to the maximum possible. Get informed, exercise your critical thinking, find the courage to dream, think outside the box, and imagine global peace and harmony. Know that you can make a difference. Get involved. Democracy is an activity. If we collectively, do not participate, it doesn't work. The opportunity to provide a service for the community is far more than civic duty. It is a process of self-exploration, growth, sharing, and learning. A social behavior that creates a cohesive, positive force that can truly transform a society. And that's what we need to do. Through service for humanity, we can, as literate members of a democratic society, collectively contribute to nurturing a community of lifelong learners and literates, individuals possessing the abilities inherent in healthy critical thinking and an environment that fosters inquiry and dissent, thus ensuring our continued progress and democracy. Interfaith and sincere dialogue will enable all sides to achieve a better understanding of each other's perspectives, which also leads to strengthening the response of all faiths to our environment and the future. Multicultural education is the process by which we can conceptualize and affirm an understanding of our diversity as peoples that inhabit this earth. Multicultural education for freedom is an overall approach for the freedom of the whole. You can do and achieve anything you want. However, you cannot do it alone. You need the help of others, for which you, I, and all of us need to field the request. As a man of faith and an educator, I seek to thwart a culture of fear for a culture of love and hope. I commit myself to nurturing a spirit of love and hope in relation to the greatest gift given to all of us, the gift of life and health. In conclusion, I say, now is the time to mobilize people and nations, and I vow not to surrender my truths and beliefs for fear and hatred. Shukran, wassalamu khitam.
Samir, as you talked, I found myself, and I'm wondering if you did as well, feeling more and more grounded and solid. And your words were strong and connected in such a way that from that solid grounding, that social ethic flows. And very, very beautifully stated and challenging, as you said, to vow and commit and to live grounded in the truths that you speak. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. After all, I hail from the holy city, Jerusalem.
Just a little comment about Jerusalem. It comes from the name, it includes the word shalom, meaning peace, which not just is peace, but is to make whole. And I think that's an important concept about and why Jerusalem is so central to all the faiths. At least we've been represented so far, except for the Buddhists. I'm sorry.
Kate, please.
I can't wait to tell my husband that I got the last word again. How many among you know who the Bagani are as a people? The Bagani. One, my colleague. The Bagani are the Blackfeet. And among the Blackfeet, there's a belief that in the beginning, old man and old woman had an agreement that they would decide how the world should be put into order. And one of the things they agreed was that he got to say how things should be, and then she got the last word. So they were going along and thinking about how long human beings should live, and made the he thought, I tell you how we'll decide. We'll take this buffalo chip and we'll toss it in the water, and if it sinks, then human beings will die. If it floats, human beings will live. So he took the buffalo chip and he threw it in the water, and what do you know, it floated. So they walked along a little further, and she said, no, I think we ought to take this rock and throw this rock in the water. And they did that, and the rock sank. And then she said to him that human beings have to die because if they don't die, they won't have any sympathy for one another. And I often think that even though we are, and this makes me somewhat emotional, even though we are people of faith, talking here, none of us authorities on God in a certain sense, all of us students, all of us small, even though we are those things, we need to suffer together. Our suffering needs to be heard one to the other. And I was sitting reading over your shoulder as you were talking, and it was a wonderful experience because I felt like I was speaking with you. And I kept thinking, now am I making him uncomfortable? Does he feel that? And so I wanted to start in a different way, but when I realized I was last, it was just too tempting to go into and the story mode that we were talking about. But I'm here because of an obligation. I got the flyer in the mail and I read it, and I was kind of outraged. How can they talk about the environment in this place and not have a Native American on that panel? So as you can tell what kind of marriage I have, I'm the grumpy one. I'm the one that does most of the talking. And so I said to my husband, I don't know how they can do this. We'll have to talk to Beth. Well, lo and behold, Beth called and asked if I would be on the panel. And I felt like if nothing else, I was obliged because of my big mouth. But now I'm going to oblige my friend Gita for a moment to stand. Gita is a member of the Confederated Salish, and I want her to tell you what the name Missoula means.
Enamasulatqua. Enamasulatqua. Isul is a word in Salish that means very cold, frozen. Etqua, at the end of the word, means water. Enam is inside the valley. So my ancestors' name for this place is the frozen water inside the valley. Do you know what that refers to? Glacial Lake, Missoula. This is where the word comes from. This is how long my ancestors have been here. And what we do as human beings is we shorten words. So veterinarian becomes vet. My great uncle, Duncan MacDonald, would tell my aunt, I'm going into Missoulette. And then it became Missoula. And that's where Missoula comes from. That's my gift to you.
Thank you, Gita, for letting me put you on the spot. So in the interest of suffering together, I want to say that I respectfully disagree with your use of the word tribalism. And I'll tell you why. I believe that the most important thing in tribal cultures is kinship. And the kinship is a broad kind of way of looking at connectedness in the world that all of you need to learn from us. Not in a separate way, but in our tradition we say, Mitaku Yasi, we are all related. We're all related. And that comes from this idea that we're of this place. We are all now of Missoula. And tribal people are primarily of a place, and they're primarily kin. So hence, when you hear the stereotypes about the great white father, it has a lot to do with the idea that tribal people couldn't treat with anyone unless they were related. So if you couldn't be made into a relative, then you had no place in their world. We use terms like Native American because we don't know Bagani, or my tradition is Nakota. We don't know what those traditions really are. We don't know them in their particularity. So as a teacher of that kind of religion, I have to find ways for that broad category to work for people. So there are two ways in which that works in every class I teach. One is that there's a long history of federal policy, US policy, toward collections of indigenous people on the continent. And that is a category called Native American. Every place that a particular policy was implicated didn't experience it in the same way, but it was meant in a broad way. And when I started graduate school in 1980, there was a book called Savagism and Civilization by Robert Burkhofer. This was in the late 1970s, when he submitted that book for publication, he wanted to put quotation marks around savagery, and the publisher wouldn't let him, because our belief systems were still seen as savagery. So there would have been a time when a person like me couldn't sit at this table. And there are times when that kind of religious intolerance shuts people out from shared knowledge. Among Native people, for example, we believe that the universe is animate. And we don't make distinctions. I have a couple of Indian names, but my first Indian name means blue eyes, which you can probably figure out. And my other name means sacred, takes the sacred stone woman. There's a belief that some people have a particular power with stones, and that's why I got that name. So we don't think of stones as inanimate. So it's very powerful to see the world as animate. And I was thinking about Navajo tradition, Dene. If I were a Navajo person and I recognized you and you were a Navajo, and I didn't know you, I would ask you who you were, and you would answer me if we both spoke to one another in Navajo. But the way I would ask you who you are is, where did your mother's birth water hit the earth? And you would answer me by saying, I am connected to the lizard clan and the other clan on my father's side, and the dragonfly and the other on my mother's side, and you would go kinship in 8 directions, so that by the time we would just, this other person, it would be translated, oh, she said, who are you? And she said, Susie. And you see what is lost when you don't have a context for understanding the depth of interrelatedness. And what does understanding kinship do for our mutuality here tonight? I think when I was thinking about this, I thought about I get going too fast in life and I get burnt out, and sometimes I figure things out at the very last minute. And I was invited to a conference and I thought I was going to be on a mentoring panel. Instead, I was the keynote speaker. And I got that, and I tried to figure out what I was going to say to these folks. And that was just the night before I was doing it. And I got this, literally one time I was trying to figure out where I had a particular book because I wasn't comfortable with how I had quoted something, and I wanted to check the quote, but I couldn't find it to save my soul, and it wasn't in the library. And I was walking down the hall in my house, and the book fell off the shelf onto my head. And so I think sometimes that's really my learning experience, is something has fall on my head. But I got the idea when I was in my hotel room that I am a Nakota. We are connected to Lakota, Dakota, and so on. Cousins, really. Assiniboines are cousins. And 7 generations ago, a famous man lived named Black Elk. And in Haudenosaunee tradition, they talk about the 7th generation. And that's become a kind of pan-Indian thing, that people will talk about living for the 7th generation. And I was realizing, what did Black Elk, who witnessed Wounded Knee, who was involved in all kinds of things in the late 19th century, what did he think when he thought about me as 7 generations out from him? What was there fundamentally about him being a human being that hadn't changed in 7 generations? And how was I going to go out and be this keynote to a group of aspiring, mostly Black, Latino, and Native American scholars, and give them a vision for 7 generations into the future? And so I found things in Black Elk's writings that helped me. Fortunately, I have an encyclopedia on my computer, and I was able to pull together some words. He talked about the hoop being broken, but he also talked about the tree flowering again and recreating the hoop and bringing the tree back together. I think being human 7 generations from now is something we can think about. Just as Native American people weren't savages in the 19th century, they were fully human. And we just need to dig in and decide how humble we want to be, how much we are willing to suffer for one another and with one another, so we can also recognize each other as human and carry forward in a responsible way. So, thank you.
In so many ways, your last word pulled all of this together. Once again, acknowledging that we are one, and what brings us together is that sense of suffering or struggle that we do together that calls us to be compassionate and recognizing really the divine in one another, the sacred in one another. And it is about relationship and connectedness. So thank you very much for that. We have about 15 minutes for some group conversation. And then that doesn't have to be the end of the conversation, but we'll end our formal part and you can continue to visit. But for the next 15 minutes, would invite you to interact with our panel, interact with each other, with insights that you gained, questions that you might have, and if there's a question for one of our panelists in particular, please speak that. So who'd like to begin? And I will, if you can't hear the question, don't worry, I'll repeat it so that you get the question, okay? Please.
Here, because of what I read in the newspaper, just quote, says, well, authors advising people to go outside. Says, you might not go outside because you don't feel safe. I realize the environment's critical, but there's no saying if you free your mind, your river will follow. I've been here a long time and I've seen the decay of community mental health. And that's why I'm here. I see it all over town. I see people, I've seen, for example, at dusk, females run to their cars, lights sprouting like mackerel all over town. Even my neighbors are just all night long, lights on. Mm-hmm. It's not what we need. We need to, and also, well, there's one phrase in here that really picked me. It said, this is a community problem. I think it's an individual problem. I think we need to accept the fact that this time, this town, we need to protect ourselves. We need to provide for our self-defense and accept that there are people in town that are, let's just say, mentally sick. And we need to heal ourselves somehow from this fear. Like old Franklin used to say, we have nothing to fear but fear itself. But when I'm around people that are afraid, well, I've seen it's contagious. The fear causes people to distrust each other, even if they don't do anything wrong to each other. When I go around tonight, I want to talk to them because I know, well, chances are they're afraid of anybody approaching them. I like to get to a place where we can turn the lights off because it's not even healthy for our town.
So can I let the rest of the audience know? Can I fill them in on what you're talking about here because they can't hear?
I'm talking about mental health.
So let me just paraphrase a little bit here. He's quoting from the newspaper article saying that we need to be outside, and sometimes out of fear, we stay inside. And so acknowledging that the issues, some of the issues like mental health is very connected to this conversation about the environment. That if we're afraid to go outside, and some of that fear is real, How do we counter the fear so that we can be free enough to turn off the lights, go outside, and be freed of all those barriers? And that's really why we gather here, and again acknowledge, Jim, as you said, we probably can't solve the whole big piece, but if each of us in our own way works with the people that are in our own little sphere of influence, perhaps addressing that sense of how do we live free so that we can in fact move on. Please.
Thank you everyone for the perspectives, and I was thinking, my name is Teresa Jacobs, and when I have been struggling with this issue for years of what's happening to the earth, and like, is it Erasmus, St. Erasmus, who said, fully human, fully alive, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I feel somewhat confounded at some sort of large scope, macro solution. But what I found that makes sense to me is a tradition that we haven't talked about today, and I'm certainly not an expert, but the ancient Indian, as in India, tradition and chakras. And it's another construct in which there are certain capacities that we have as human beings. And so for me, that is actually something that I turn to again and again and again over the last 25 years. It's similar to whatever you're saying, but
yes.
It's a way for me not to be overwhelmed, but to understand that we all have capacities. The first chakra being food, shelter, clothing. It's the root chakra, and this is about emotion, as this gentleman was talking about, and will, and heart. What the agape, opening oneself up. Like you were saying, agape. That's what this is. This chakra here. And verbal and nonverbal communication, and intuition, and then the most divine aspect of us that you're rooted, and we're also part of the divine. So it's just another perspective that I can only but it's something that I've explored through my art, and it's been very helpful to me.
So another way of describing some of the spiritual traditions that we're talking about here is again, maybe different words, but very similar in terms of where is some spiritual energy within us that grounds us, connects us to the divine, and flows out of us.
Yeah, and what I was trying to say too is it's fully human.
Absolutely.
These are all
Yeah.
capacities.
Yeah. Please.
Father Hogan's description, his understanding of Christianity was a real revelation to me. Christianity has practically gotten to be a dirty word in our society. It has been so abused in the name of Jesus, has been so put to such sinister and even exactly use that I really appreciated hearing how you see it. It was entirely new to me, and it was very welcome. And I'm afraid probably a very small minority of you.
Let me just say that what she just said is that Father Hogan's description of Christianity was a revelation to her, a new way of hearing about Christianity, and I'm going to put this word in your mouth. Tell me if it's wrong. Refreshing, and so Jim, would you want to comment a little bit on that? Say anything more?
It's definitely a minority opinion.
Join the club.
Talking about minorities, I mean, we stand together. It's the same kind of thing. Native American spirituality is extremely rich. We've always thought of it as a minority opinion, and thankfully there are more and more voices making us aware of and conscious of that tradition.
Samir, did you want to?
I was saying when he mentioned the word minority, I was saying join the club. And then for the gentleman that's afraid, I'll share with him what I tell my students. Have no fear. Samir is here. Remember, in my words, I said I aim and seek to thwart this culture of fear. Because, let me share with you, if I may, nothing that comes from scriptures, or it comes from my grandmother, God bless her soul. She told me this when I was maybe 11 or 12. I left Jerusalem to come to Big Sky Country when I was 16. And it took me a long time before I understood what my grandmother was talking about. But I was talking to her about colonialism and what happened to Palestine. And my grandmother said, listen, Samir, the colonial powers embedded in the Arab characteristic three things that took us downhill. One was fear, two was envy, three was greed. And she said, Teta, that's how we address each other. It's similar like Spanish. She said, Teta, when we can get rid of those three, we'll be back to where we were. So it took me many, many years to understand the words of my grandmother. And she was illiterate, but very spiritual. Her home is right outside Al-Haram al-Sharif. Yes. And as far as what my colleague said to my left about people in the Quran, Allah says, I created you as peoples so you will get to know each other.
One more. Please.
This concept of future, I know there are cultures that when they say they must do good now for the future generations, they really mean that. But in U.S. culture, so many things I've been involved in throughout my life, that time after time when they start talking about for their children or children's children or grandchildren, they mean we don't have to do anything now. And I think for U.S. culture, you need to say, we need to do now.
Yeah.
And if you're not doing it now, you will never have it done.
So perhaps just bouncing off that a little bit and bringing our conversation here to a close, acknowledging that what we do from this conversation really flows out of a deeply held spiritual sense that there is something bigger than all of us as individuals, but calls us together in unity to bring forth a vision of what God intended when God created us and this world. And so our doing and how we do it is grounded in a deep sense of what it means to be fully alive. So you may know that the word spirit comes from the Latin word spirare, which means to breathe. And so to be fully alive is to be deeply spiritual. So certainly thank you for sharing in this conversation that has been both invigorating, provocative, challenging, and incredibly inspiring for what we can do together. Please feel free to have more coffee, more dessert, and continue this conversation, and would invite you back tomorrow for another full day of sharing and learning together. Beth, any other announcements as we... Okay, so this conversation continues for a week, so Georgia, tell us about next Thursday.
You know, I was just going to make one comment because I always like to have the last word.
As long as it's a woman, that's all.
Yeah, okay. That I totally agree with you that, you know, we have this awareness, and then what turns that awareness into action. And I think that we do put a lot of obstacles there. And I think that there was an example someone used about how our brains are wired evolutionarily. You know, if someone says an elephant is stampeding in the room, I mean, we're going to all get up and run. If someone says, you know, in 5 months you're going to have an elephant stampeding in this room, well, you know, give me a 5-minute warning. And so we have to know the elephant is stampeding in the room, and that we somehow have to make that bridge very, very quickly from awareness to action. And I think that often we go home with a great awareness, like you said, and it's not translated into action. And I hear you, and I think we're all called to that tonight. And so I just wanted to say that I hear you very deeply, and I think we're all going to take action, and partly because of what you've challenged us with, and because we've all committed that we have the courage to do that. And Beth, one more thing, please come to the conference tomorrow, which is phenomenal. And then next Thursday, we have a very interesting public talk. Dr. Mary Jo Kreitzer, who is the executive director of the Spirituality and Healing Center at the University of Minnesota, is going to be coming. And she's a phenomenal woman. And she is going to be talking about the person and the planet. Their center talks about the whole systems approach, you know, the interconnectedness of all of us as beings. And she's going to be doing a great presentation next Thursday night. Beth, I was trying to remember if there's anything else to say about it.
7 o'clock right here.
Oh yeah, 7 o'clock right here. So please come. It is through the great generosity of St. Patrick's that they time and time again open up all of their facilities, they pay for advertising, and they so honor these spiritual traditions. And truly it is these spiritual traditions that is going to inspire us and save us, because we are the spiritual tradition. And so as someone who works for St. Pat's, I just want to say I'm so grateful to Marianne, who has such talent and such spirit to guide us, and everyone who's on this panel. I am so inspired, it's beyond. So thank you so much.
Thank you for being back.
So we'll see you back here tomorrow morning.